So this is the the second lecture on Emily Dickinson, the second voice note. So I ended voice note number 1 by saying that Dickinson's obsession, continuous exploration of the world, of heaven as such, the heavenly world, a vision of heaven, which is very profoundly found in her religious poems, her journeys to the new continent of eternity, as she said. If this is one side of Dickinson's, one can safely say that Dickinson's more interesting than the heavenly explorations was, of course, the self, the exploration of what Dickinson called the undiscovered continent of the self. In a way, it was a great obsession, an obsession with what was variously called by her in various poems: soul, self, spirit, mind, consciousness, me, heart, brain. And all of these, the words that I just mentioned, soul, self, spirit, mind, consciousness, heart, etc., these in a way were sort of approximate synonyms for her, and they were equivalent to the hidden corridors of the inner life. Hidden corridor is also a phrase from Dickinson, hidden corridors of the inner life. The way, the canny perception, the shrewdness of her perceptions regarding this inner corridor, this hidden corridor, and the genius, and her genius in articulating them, it continues to be extremely, it continues to be a very sophisticated and contemporary feel for most readers. And I mean, to use the phrase that Dickinson herself said about poetry, what is poetry? She said that poetry is something in which you feel physically as if the top of your head has been taken off. So this applies to Dickinson's poems. When you read these explorations of the self, the mind, the heart, the brain, consciousness, the hidden and inner corridors, we feel that the tops of our heads have been blown off. And of course, she thanked God by saying that the cellars of the soul, again a phrase from Dickinson, the cellars, C-E-L-L-A-R-S, cellars of the soul, S-O-U-L. She said that is the loudest place that God made. And the paradox is that though it is the loudest place, the cellar of the soul is the loudest place, yet it is also, God also has made it still. It is licensed to be still. And Dickinson was a tireless translator, tireless communicator of this loudness and this stillness. She constantly made efforts to transform these inarticulate cries taken from the depths of our consciousness into the language of poetry. And this ability, the ability to do this, by this I mean this ability to transform something which is inarticulate and hidden and inner, almost beyond language, to something which is the shape of a poem. This depended in a very major way upon her understanding that poetry should convey awful and awe-inspiring truths only by being indirect, by indirection. So we have the very famous poem, and I mean, it's one of her most famous poems, in which she writes that tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. So when you are circuitous, when you are taking a different path, you are not going the straight way. You are bending, divagating. You are deviating. Then is the way to be successfully reach that core of truth. Tell all the truth, but tell it slanted. Thus, although she wrote from the depth of her own experience of love, of loss, in a way she was not a confessional poet in the contemporary sense of the term. I mean, we know that a confessional poet is someone who talks about her own self, on her own sense of her own sense of the self, the hidden corridors, the inner corridors, often traumatic, etc. But she was not this, because she never exhibited details of her personal life. Far from showing these, she has actually left scholars forever guessing at the nature of her profound emotional trauma, the trauma that she might have experienced in her late 20s or early 30s. Scholars are still guessing about the identity of the great loves of her life. Scholars are still guessing about the reasons she chose not to publish her poetry. Scholars are still guessing, and there is no resolution in any of these, they are still guessing about the reason why she withdrew from society. In a way, she possessed an extraordinary ability to simultaneously take herself off, be detached, distance herself, and also at the same time make her very intimately accessible to the reader. And you understand, maybe this is the definition of lyric poetry. That, you are very accessible to the reader, but you yourself, you are also at the same time distant. And this paradox is the mystery of the lyric poem. The lyric poet is someone who reveals herself while remaining hidden. And that is what Emily Dickinson has done all her life. She in her correspondence to her literary friend, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, in one of the letters, Dickinson writes, I'm quoting that letter, a sentence, I quote, "When I state myself as the representative of the verse, it does not mean me, but a supposed person," unquote. When I state myself as the representative of the verse, it does not mean me, but a supposed person. Indeed, she dramatized her inner life through a large cast of personas, almost like the way, in a way, Fernando Pessoa, the very famous Portuguese poet, did. She cultivated this large number of speakers. Sometimes she's the child, a boy. And a boy she both pitied and wished she could always remain, and through whose eyes she expressed her sort of simple, William Blakeish, naive perceptions, songs of innocence perceptions. Sometimes she's the drunken bee poet, drunken bee poet in the sense, like a bee, she is buzzing and she's collecting honey and she's observing from close. Sometimes she's the dauntless singer, the robin who's a singer, the bird robin who's a singer. Sometimes she's the sparrow with her precious little crumb. Sometimes she's the queen of Calvary. Sometimes she's the exile from love. Sometimes she's the triumphant wife without any recognition. Sometimes she's the sanctified woman in white. Sometimes she's the mourner. She's also the dying. She's the departed. She's the feaster at the banquet of abstemiousness. I mentioned this earlier. She's the semi-visible observer of the natural world. Sometimes she's the exile from the world, exile from nature. Sometimes she's a person who has absolutely surrendered to heaven. Sometimes she's the scornful sort of suppliant of heaven. At times she's the invisible prophetic figure, the Sibyl-like figure behind the wisdom poems. And those poems make a very important part of her oeuvre, those wisdom poems in which she sort of gives us wisdom words on situations of life. Sometimes she's that, and sometimes she's nobody. She's no one at all. That is also there. So it's a pretty long list. And this is a partial list. And this partial list even this partial list just reveals to us a gallery of opposites. We have together the grand and the humble. We have together the victorious and the defeated. We have together the sufferer and the person who has survived the suffering. We have together the believer who has surrendered and the doubter who is questioning. What were these speakers or personas in Dickinson? In Dickinson's poetry, are they aspects of her multifaceted sensibility, or is something very sort of fractured or fragmented in her? Because there has been a group of critics and maybe also readers who complain of her inconsistency. That Dickinson is very inconsistent. There are so many things being said at the same time in so different poems, in different numbers, that one fails to sort of get a whole vision of Dickinson. That this is the entire Dickinson. And one can say that that all those persons who find her inconsistent also fail to grasp, they fail to understand that Dickinson's work, in a way, it mimics the contradictions of consciousness itself. Isn't consciousness contradictory? Isn't it made up of so many different things which are at odds with each other all the time? And a consciousness which is particularly an exploring, probing, profound and volatile consciousness, as volatile, probing, profound, exploratory as hers. For a lyric poet, attempting in each poem to bring out, to distill the essence of a single moment, for such a poet there is nothing puzzling in the fact that one poem may contradict another poem. And further, in line with this, Dickinson has also been charged with not having a sort of grand, overarching poetic project, some grand vision of the human enterprise, something which in a way gives us an idea of what is poetry, what is life, etc., etc. Just something that we expect major poets to give, a vision of life, a fused, unified, holistic vision of life. And Dickinson doesn't have this. One can very, 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 briefly and powerfully rebut this accusation by saying that Dickinson is the poet of the insight, of the fleeting insight. She's the poet of the moment of vision. She's the poet who does not have any social or political program, and who was dismissive about such social political programs, because life is not like that at all. You cannot define Dickinson by what she believes, but rather one can try to define Dickinson by what she keeps caring about, what she keeps turning and looking at this way and that way. As if holding up an object and just examining it from various sides, from various angles. In a way, you are looking at a prism and you are seeing things from different angles and see different forms of light coming out. And not only from poem to poem, but even sometimes within a single poem, we see that she's taking a sort of profoundly groping stance where in which the searching mind is sort of changing direction, moving, turning against the original premise, even before the poem ends, or maybe the poem just trails off in a sort of final Dickensian dash as such. It trails off that way. And this sort of anti-project, she doesn't have this project, so Dickinson's, in a way, anti-project, in a way, has been enough to make her very contemporary, very modern, give her or assure her a great status in the American literary canon. And of course, it continues to win a devoted readership for her all the time. Maybe this lack of project is something that is very endearing about Dickinson. So I'll stop here.